Black Swan is a wind nihility dot unit that has very backloaded damage, and has special dot properties. She's a good source of dots for Kafka, and even has some def shred for her team. This video will tackle Black Swan's best light cones, relics, team building, and eidolons from an F2P perspective. I've laid out the chapters so you can skip ahead to the part that you need to hear most. Kit breakdown. Her main gimmick lies in her talent. Black Swan's abilities do not apply wind shear, instead they apply Arcana, a special stacking dot that can be reprocced by Kafka, and more importantly, has a special effect when the dot procs on the enemy's turn. At one stack, the dot has 240% attack motion value, or MV, and it gains 12 extra MV per stack. The maximum stacks are 50, but since the count resets every time it proc, you're probably never going to get that high. When the enemy has 3 or more stacks, they take additional damage and apply Arcana to adjacent targets. If they have 7 or more, then the dot will have Def Ignore. Both her skill and basic apply Arcana, but her skill has a higher MV and deals blast damage. This allows her to be SP neutral and even be SP positive at times. Her ultimate deals AoE damage and applies Epiphany on the targets. Epiphany applies a vulnerability that's only active during an enemy's turn, and it will count as all the different types of dots so that her light cones ability will be activated. When enemies take damage due to Arcana, their stacks don't reset for one turn. Her ultimate's vulnerability is admittedly quite low. This does mean that your rotations might change, and that this will incentivize you to use ultimates to cut in the enemy's turn to benefit off the vulnerability. Both her A2 and A4 traits give Black Swan more ways of applying Arcana. When Black Swan hits an enemy already afflicted with a dot, it applies an additional stack of Arcana, and whenever an ally applies a dot on an enemy, that adds a stack as well. Her A6 trace increases her damage percent based on how much EHR she has. This ability caps out at 120% EHR and translates to 72% damage. This has immense value for her since dots are affected by damage percent, and this essentially takes care of her need for damage percent entirely. She is just as tanky as Ruan Mei, same HP and same def stats. Since Black Swan's build will be very hungry for EHR and attack, you'll notice that she will be a lot less tanky than her in practice. If you're running a dot comp, you better have an invested sustainer. Rotation. Black Swan's ultimate costs 120 energy. If you're running her to be SP negative and skill spam, then she'll have a 4-turn rotation. She can be SP positive or neutral though, depending on what you need, and have a 5-turn instead if you skill twice and basic thrice. I do not recommend running an ERR rope on Black Swan, as she scales super hard on attack percent, and that running it will lead to a sharp drop off of her damage. However, if you manage to find absurd amounts of attack percent through external sources, then it might be worth it. For the average person though, don't do it. Light cones. Her signature light cone, Reforged Remembrance, boosts her effect hit rate by 40%, and she gains a stacking buff while attacking enemies that are inflicted with wind shear, burn, bleed, or shock. Each type gives 1 stack up to a maximum of 4. It gives her quite a lot of attack percent and def ignore, and it is no doubt her best light cone. This does mean that she will want lots of daughters in her team to maximize its effect. She can use Kafka and Silverwolf's cone quite well. Both of these increase Black Swan's damage and also acts as a supportive cone for the rest of her daughter friends. There's a lot of good nihility dot cones, so I don't think you'll be having trouble on a fallback option. If we're talking about raw damage, then S5 Goodnight Sleep Well is great and can't be beat. Though S5 It's Showtime is right behind it in terms of damage. Eyes of the Prey helps out her EHR requirements and her dot damage. This by far is her most comfortable F2P light cone. Resolution shines as Swirls of Sweat allows her to shred even more def, which amplifies the rest of her party's damage. The value of this light cone wavers on how much def shred you already have in your team. If you've got a lot of it, it's great. If not, then it's mid. Fermata will be the baseline F2P option due to it being free on the memories shop, and it'll be fine for the most part. You'll want to upgrade to one of the cones mentioned before eventually. Relics. Her best relic by far is definitely the Dot Prisoner set. If you're playing Black Swan, you're going to be playing Kafka, and therefore farming the Prisoner set. You can use 2 piece of relevant sets, or 4-piece Quantum if you really don't want to farm Prisoner. You should though. She builds EHR percent on her chest, speed on her boots, attack percent or damage percent on her sphere, and attack percent on her rope. Black Swan already has a ton of damage percent due to her A6 trace, and the difference between attack percent and damage percent sphere is 0.06, so you should really not worry about which one you get and just roll with what you roll with. Her best planar set is Pan-Galactic Enterprise, since it boosts her attack by her EHR percent, and since you're going to be building a truckload of EHR anyway due to her trace that gives damage percent based on EHR. But since Pan-Galactic is attached to a dog water set named Talia, you might might want to use Glamour, SSS, or Fleet of the Ageless. All of these are viable options, but I recommend you farm World 3 because all daughters use both SSS and Fleet quite often. It's a very efficient world to farm. EHR is her most important stat due to her dots only having a 65% chance to proc. You need at least 67% to guarantee her Death Shred, and you need 100% to fully capitalize off Fan Galactic. And her A6 trace is maxed out at 120%. I recommend you get around 120 EHR on the stat screen, but 157% is the absolute cap if you really want to guarantee your dots. Just to remind you though, it's extremely hard to hit that high, and I suggest you take a light cone with EHR if you're struggling with it. After hitting those EHR requirements, you'll be looking for attack percent and speed substats. Remember that dots don't crit, so it's pointless to go for that. To double down on this point, her attack MVs are absolutely horrendous. So even if you wanted to crit Swan, you're going to be met with a 90% on skill and the 120% on ultimate. Speaking in raw MVs, Himiko's got her completely beat. Team building daughters. Black Swan will be usually run in a full dot comp alongside Kafka, and you'll just switch up the 4-star lineup depending on what your enemies are weak against. If they're weak against fire, bring Gwynaifen. If they're weak to physical, bring Luca. She will always want at least one daughter in her team so that she will be able to make use of her traces. Currently, dot nihility's in a weird spot where they're not strong enough without Kafka, and at the same time they can't be used as hyper carries due to their damage being split into their dots. Dots don't crit, and they only happen on the enemy's turn, making it very hard for them to compete with real hyper carries like Jingliu, Dunhang, and even Jingyuan. For supports, you need to look for units that boost attack, speed, damage percent, or apply stat debuffs. You don't want anyone that boosts crit, and even if you do have them leveled, you should most likely use them in another comp anyway. For harmonies, this would entail Ruan Mei, Asta, and Hanya. Ruan Mei is great alongside daughters because she boosts both damage percent and speed, as well as give them rest spend, all stats that are highly valuable for them. Asta is fine and gives speed and attack, though she's usually outclassed by an invested third daughter in most cases. Hanya boosts damage percent, attack percent, and speed, though her ultimate is single target, and you'll most likely be using that on Kefka. For stat debuffers, there's only Silver Wolf and Pela. Pela's nice because she boosts EHR with her trace and has an AoE Death Shred, not to mention that she's extremely SP positive. Silver Wolf is great if you manage to match up enemy weaknesses according to your team comp. You just gotta find an enemy that's weak to at least 2 of your team's elements, and you don't need to deal with their 50-50 implants. Her single target Death Shred is great against elites.
Leave me alone! Acheron!
One thing that dot comps struggle with is SP. Since all daughters are sub DPSs, most of them will want to go negative or neutral. This means that there isn't much space for your sustainer to breathe and use SP. This is where the dilemma of what sustainer you'll use comes into play. Huohuo is great alongside daughters since she boosts the whole team's attack percent and gives them energy. Quite literally everyone in the team benefits greatly from this, since most daughters have around 120 to 140 energy ultimates. The catch is that Huohuo's rotations require her to skill every now and then, which might screw over your sub DPS turns. If there were ways to get external sources of SP, or if you have her E1, then she would be the best pick. I have this section here as a note that she might be useful for daughters in the future. So for now, the best sustainer will be a Locha with S5 multiplication and the absolute highest amount of speed that you can get so that he can basic spam and generate as much SP as possible. You can also do this on Nat and Lynx, but you can't do it on Huohuo since her only way of healing is through her skill, while Nat and Lynx can heal through their ultimate. You'll always be running Kafka alongside Black Swan, so you'll only have one flex slot to play with. Currently, the best unit for it is Ruan Mei or a third daughter, but I think the moment another 5-star daughter releases, Ruan Mei will be better off used in other teams. I know that having 2 limited 5-stars is a steep investment, but that's just the type of unit Black Swan is. Eidolons. For the question of E1 versus S1, E1 is the way to go. There are a lot of good nihility cones to go through, so if you have a fallback, just use that and go for E1. This is because her E1 shreds 25% of all enemies' rest when they're afflicted with a dot of the corresponding element. This is roughly a 22% damage increase since rush shred is hard to come by. Her E2 applies 6 stacks of Arcana to adjacent enemies whenever an enemy afflicted with Arcana dies, and her E4 further reduces enemy rest while they're in the Epiphany ult stage. She also regenerates 8 energy at the start of the enemy's enemy's turn. This will only cut her rotation down if at least 3 enemies are caught in it, so it can be negligible. And finally, her E6 allows her to apply Arcana when an enemy gets attacked, and each application of Arcana has a 50% chance to apply 2 stacks instead. Overall, E1 is very valuable, but the rest of her eidolons aren't too game-breaking. Personally, I would just pull for E0 or E1 and save up for the inevitable 5-star burner or leader. Conclusion: I've been seeing that people are saying that Sampo E6 is going to be better than Black Swan. My opinion on the matter is that if you already have Sampo E6 fully leveled and built, you don't need to pull for Black Swan. Most of the time, you'll be able to clear MOC no problem with the 3-dot comp without her. However, E6 Sampo is already maxed out and hit his damage ceiling. If you don't have Sampo invested, or if you want to eventually get Black Swan's eidolons, you can do so and she will be better than Sampo by then. Once again, this is a steep investment cost just for one comp, so that's why I'm placing her at B+ tier. I've no doubt that she will be able to perform in Kafka's comps. It's just that the E6 4-star daughters are already strong, and the damage difference between Swan and them is minimal. It also doesn't help that I find it hard to imagine slotting Swan in any other comp than Dot. She simply doesn't offer enough supportive capabilities. The only thing she has is her 21% depth shred and very conditional vuln. She also can't be used effectively as a hyper carry due to Dot's not being able to crit, and that she has lower than average motion values. Despite all of this though, I will be pulling for her a little bit after this video is uploaded. I'll pin the link in the comments below, so come join and chill. If you like this video, please subscribe if you want more of these guides. That's it for me. My name is Kyte, and thanks for watching. See ya!